Hey guys, tonight we trudge back in time to the chilly, wind-whipped villages of medieval Iceland, where the mountains loom like sleepy giants and the air tastes like snow, even in midsummer. The kind of place where your nose probably freezes. Shut halfway through breakfast, and the biggest scandal of the week might involve someone's goat accidentally wandering onto someone else's moss patch. You're about to dive into the peculiar world of Icelandic village punishments, where justice is served not with swords and dungeons, but with frostbitten law courts, sheep payments, and a lot of really awkward apologies. Spoiler alert, if you're hoping for medieval torture chambers tonight, you probably won't survive this one. It's just fines, exile, and a few public shame ceremonies. But that's the whole point. You're here to drift off, not sprint, through a gladiator match. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location and local time in the comments. It's fun to see just how far across the time zones this sleepy little channel can reach. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a tiny Icelandic village sometime around the year 1000 AD. The land is harsh, volcanic, and unforgiving. Snowdrifts pile up against turf houses, and sheep graze lazily along the hills, completely unaware that they're basically currency here. In fact, if you knock over your neighbor's fence and your goat eats his cabbage patch, congratulations, you owe him a sheep. That's the punishment. No jail time, no stocks, no medieval iron masks, just livestock accounting. Justice in medieval Iceland is mostly about keeping the peace in a place where, honestly, everyone already has enough problems. There's volcanic ash falling from the sky sometimes, earthquakes rattling the ground beneath your sheepskin boots, and winter lasts long enough to make you forget what your own toes look like. So if you steal someone's cheese or borrow an axe without asking, people don't want to throw you in a dungeon. They want to wrap things up quickly and get back to drying fish. Disputes are handled at something called a thing, which is basically a community assembly where everyone stands around outside and settles arguments. And yes, the word thing is literally the word they used for it. In Old Norse, it just meant assembly. But today it sounds like you're heading to an extremely vague meeting where you might discuss goats, Moss writes, or possibly whether or not it's legal to sneeze on someone's bread. You trudge up the hill to the local thing site, wrapped in a wool cloak, the wind trying to steal your hat. Villagers gather around in a circle, stamping their feet to stay warm, while the chieftain known as the Gogi reads out cases. No microphones, no lawyers in dramatic suits. Just people shouting over the sound of seagulls, let's say. Someone accidentally insults another person's honor by calling their boat slightly crooked. That might not sound like a crime to you, but in medieval Iceland, honor is everything. So you settle it here, at the thing, where the usual punishment might involve paying a fine in silver if you're richer in sheep, if you're like most folks. Sometimes the fine isn't even about sheep. Historians still argue whether there were cases where you could pay in butter, which, honestly, feels very Icelandic. Imagine standing there, handing over 3 tubs of slightly rancid butter while your neighbor nods solemnly. One quirky tradition that's survived in Icelandic literature is the idea of the fire reconciliation. After a dispute is settled, both parties might be invited to sit by the same hearth and share a drink. It's like forced friend-making. You glare at your enemy over a cup of sour whey, both of you pretending to enjoy the moment. But the fight is officially over. The legal system is based mostly on memorization. There's no paper law book to consult. Instead, there's an official called the law speaker, who has to memorize all the laws and recite them out loud once a year at the Althing, the big national assembly held outdoors at Thingvellir. Historians still debate how accurate these recitations actually were. Did the law speaker sometimes improvise? Slip in a few rules about not stealing his lunch? We'll never really know. Punishments for minor crimes are carefully calculated. There's actually a fine schedule, like a medieval menu of misbehavior. Break someone's window well. They didn't have glass windows, but you get the idea. You pay a set number of sheep. Accidentally poke someone with a spear during a friendly conversation. More sheep. The goal isn't revenge, it's balance. Icelandic law focuses on keeping the community intact, because let's be honest, in a place this cold and remote, you can't exactly afford to lose half the village to a feud over fishing rights. There are no police officers, no sheriffs. If someone refuses to pay their fine, it's basically up to the victim's family to enforce the punishment. Which leads to a lot of tense dinners, probably, where you sit across from your cousin, who owes you 6 sheep but just keeps staring into his soup by the time the sun starts to set, which, during certain seasons, might mean 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're back in your turf house, warming your hands by the fire. You can still hear the echoes of the thing in your ears, the murmured settlements, the clinking of silver coins, the occasional bleat of a confused sheep being handed over as part of an apology package. And outside, the wind continues to howl. Across the lava fields, as the village tucks itself in for another long night. Inside your turf house, the night stretches on. The walls are made of stacked grass, sod, and stones, packed tightly to keep out the wind. Though let's be still sneaks in anyway. You shift under a woolen blanket, listening to the faint crackle of a sea oil lamp. And as you drift into the slower pace of Icelandic village life, you start to think about the more peculiar punishments, the ones that go beyond the sheep. Fines and butter tributes. Sometimes, when the crime is too serious for a fine but too minor for permanent exile, villages get creative. Take outlawry, for example. That's when someone is declared legally outside society. It's like being unfollowed by the entire village at once. If you're fully outlawed, nobody is allowed to feed you or give you shelter. You can't come to the thing. You can't buy or sell goods. And you basically have to wander off into the wilderness to live like a very grumpy hermit. But there's also something called lesser outlawry. That's when you're banished for exactly 3 years, not forever. After that, you're technically allowed to come back. Of course, whether people want you back is another story. Historians still argue whether anyone actually liked their neighbors enough to invite them home after a solid 3 years of brooding in the hills. One of the oddest punishments in medieval Iceland involved something called the unstang, a cursed pole, usually carved with runes, that you'd plant in the ground to insult someone publicly. Imagine your neighbor sticks a stick in your front yard with a horse skull on top, mutters some insults about your fishing skills, and leaves it there for the entire village to see. That's basically what this is. It's part punishment, part magical bad Yelp review. And yes, according to the sagas, people took these public shaming rituals very seriously. Sometimes, you'd even see satirical verses carved onto walls or spoken loudly in gatherings. These weren't meant to be funny haha jokes, but biting insults disguised as poetry. Calling someone lazy or accusing them of cowardice in verse was like medieval Icelandic stand-up comedy, except, with life-altering social consequences. You don't just get roasted, you get legally roasted. Of course, there are no medieval Icelandic jails. Why would there be? Who has time to build a prison when you're busy drying fish, patching boats, and trying not to get blown off a cliff? Instead, punishment is handled in the open air, where the sky seems endless and the mountains are always judging you from the horizon. If someone commits a more violent crime, say murder, that's a whole different level of drama. But even then, the punishment often involves fines. Yes, you heard that right. In many cases, you could pay your way out of a murder accusation by offering the victim's family something called wergild, literally man price. It's not exactly cheap, though. Depending on the victim's social rank, you might owe an entire herd of livestock, multiple parcels of land, or all the silver you can carry without pulling a back muscle. And yet murder feuds could spiral out of control anyway. Families would argue over compensation, refuse the offered payment, or retaliate, leading to decades-long blood feuds. Remember, this is a society without formal law enforcement. People basically handled justice like it was a long-running group project that nobody could agree on. Historians still debate whether these feuds were fueled more by genuine outrage or by the chance to grab more land while the other side was distracted. Some punishments were oddly specific. There's a tale in one saga where a man is sentenced to stand barefoot in the snow as penance. Not exactly a cozy time, but better than losing your head. Another story tells of a woman punished for gossiping by being forced to carry a symbolic burden, usually a heavy stone, while walking through the village. So yes, public shaming was alive and well, long before the internet got involved. And let's not forget about property-based punishments. If you owed someone compensation and couldn't pay, the community might confiscate your boat. That's basically like losing your car, your house, and your food delivery app all at once. Without a boat in Iceland, you're basically stuck staring at the water, wishing you had a paddle by now. The crackling of the lamp has slowed, and the room has settled into silence. Outside, the wind presses softly against the turf walls, like an old friend checking in. You think about how this community, wrapped in cold and isolation, managed to create a legal system that, while quirky, mostly worked. There were no police, no kings swooping in to enforce the law, just ordinary people coming together at the thing to argue about moss patches, sheep counts, and whether or not your poetry is too mean. It's strange to imagine a world where justice is handled with storytelling, public verses, and symbolic gestures. But in a place as remote and rugged as medieval Iceland, that's exactly how things worked. The law wasn't written down, it was spoken. And punishment wasn't about locking people away, it was about restoring balance, keeping the peace, and making sure everyone had enough goats to get through the winter. You picture the snowy paths winding through the village, footprints pressed into the frost, and you realize that life here isn't just about survival, it's about staying connected, even when you're arguing over insult poetry or counting out butter fines. And as you drift deeper into the quiet, the sagas continue, softly spinning tales of cold mountains, simmering feuds, and the peculiar, peaceful punishments of long ago. Iceland now, you can let your mind wander further, letting go of the frozen sheep pastures and the cold breath of Icelandic mountains. Picture the soft crackling of that tiny lamp again, its warm glow flickering on turf walls, stitched together with grass and memory. Imagine the snow gently piling outside, not as something threatening, but as a quiet blanket settling over the village rooftops, smoothing out the roughness of the day. Let the thought of all those villagers drift away, their squabbles, their funny finds, their whispered apologies around smoky hearths. Everyone's tucked in now. Even the mountains seem to be sleeping, their peaks wrapped in low clouds, hidden from view. Your breathing can slow, your hands resting softly, like folded wings. There's no need to hold on to any thoughts right now. Let them melt away like frost under a rising sun. There's nothing left to fix or figure out tonight. No village assemblies, no complicated goat negotiations, just this gentle stillness. You're safe here, wrapped in warmth, drifting further into rest. The world outside can wait. For now, you can let go completely, sinking into sleep, like snow settling quietly over a peaceful winter night.